The first thing Adrian Vale did after telling his wife that his mistress needed a kidney was ask her to sign her own death warrant. Not literally. Adrian was far too polished for that. He simply looked Mara in the eyes and said, "You're going to donate yours." Mara stared at him through the glass wall of Celine's private hospital suite. Celine lay in the center of a bed that looked more expensive than most people's homes, her pale face turned toward the ceiling, one hand resting delicately over her stomach. There were flowers everywhere, white roses, dozens of them. Adrian had ordered them that morning, for the woman he loved. Mara stood outside the room in the same black dress she'd worn to a charity dinner the night before. She hadn't slept. Her heels hurt, her throat was dry, and somehow, none of that mattered, because she'd just heard her husband tell her to give another woman a part of her body. Mara pushed open the door. Celine's eyes immediately found hers. For half a second, something flashed across Celine's face. Satisfaction. Then it disappeared beneath trembling lips and frightened eyes. The delicate woman she'd perfected herself into. "Adrian," she whispered. "Please don't fight with her because of me." Mara almost laughed. Almost. That was Celine's favorite trick. She could throw a knife and then beg everyone not to punish the person she'd stabbed. Adrian turned toward Mara. His expression was cold. Not angry. Cold. That was worse. "The doctors ran the compatibility tests," he said. "You're a match." Mara looked at Celine. Celine lowered her eyes. "Congratulations," Mara said. Adrian's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke, Mara. I know. Then act like it." Mara folded her arms. "Act like what?" "Like my wife." There it was. That word. Wife. Adrian only remembered that Mara was his wife when he wanted something from her. When he needed her to attend an event, she was his wife. When his family needed a respectable face beside his name, she was his wife. When his investors wanted to see a stable family image, she was his wife. But when Mara needed him to defend her, suddenly, she was just Mara, the difficult woman, the jealous woman, the wife who supposedly hated the woman her husband loved. Mara looked at Celine again. She had started crying, quietly, perfectly. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Please," Celine whispered. "I don't want her to feel forced." Mara almost admired her. Almost. Celine had been practicing that voice for years. Soft enough to sound innocent, weak enough to make every man in the room feel heroic. Adrian reached for Celine's hand. "Don't worry." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "I'm here." Mara watched them. Husband and mistress. A love story built on the humiliation of another woman. Then Adrian looked back at her. "You're healthy. She's sick. You're a compatible donor. There isn't really a decision to make." Mara stared at him. "Yes, there is." His eyes hardened. "No. Yes." Mara took a slow breath. "I am not donating my kidney to Celine." Silence. Even Celine stopped crying. Adrian slowly stood. He was tall enough that Mara had to tilt her head to look at him. For years that had been enough to intimidate her. It wasn't anymore. "Think carefully about what you're saying." "I have. She's dying." "No, she's not." The words slipped out before Mara could stop them. Celine's face changed. Just slightly. But Mara saw it. Fear. Then Adrian stepped toward her. "What did you say?" Mara met his eyes. "I said I'm not donating my kidney." His voice dropped. "You're my wife. And you have an obligation to me." Mara almost smiled. An obligation. That was what he called marriage now. An obligation. Not love, not partnership, not trust. She looked at the man she'd once loved so desperately that she would have done anything to keep him happy. She wondered when exactly she'd stopped recognizing him. Maybe it was the first time Celine accused her of pushing her down the stairs. Maybe it was the night Adrian locked her out of their bedroom because Celine had sent him a picture of a bruise she claimed Mara had caused. Or maybe it was the afternoon he cut up Mara's favorite dress because Celine had told him Mara wore it to provoke her. No, it was probably the day he believed Celine over her when she claimed Mara had pulled her hair. Mara remembered that one clearly. Celine had appeared at the dining room table with her hair deliberately disheveled and tears running down her face. Adrian had rushed to her. "What happened?" Celine had looked at Mara, then whispered. Mara got angry. That was all she'd needed to say. Adrian hadn't asked Mara what happened. He hadn't checked the security cameras. He hadn't asked a single question. He had simply walked toward her. Disgust had filled his eyes. Apologize. Mara had stared at him. For what? For hurting her. I didn't touch her. Celine had started crying harder, and Adrian had believed every tear. He always did. That was the problem. Celine didn't need evidence. She only needed tears. Mara came back to the present. Adrian was still standing in front of her. "You will donate," he said. "No." His eyes narrowed. "You really want to make this difficult? I'm not the one making it difficult." Celine spoke softly from the bed. "Adrian, please, let her go." Mara looked at her. There it was again. The performance. Celine wanted him angry enough to hurt Mara while pretending she wanted peace. Adrian turned to her. "Celine, don't worry about her." Then he looked at Mara. "You have 3 days." Mara frowned. 3 days for what? To agree. "And if I don't?" He stepped closer. His voice became almost gentle. "I'll make sure you regret it." Mara felt something inside her go completely still. For years, she had been afraid of Adrian Vale. His money, his name, his influence, his temper, his family, his ability to destroy anyone who stood in his way. But standing there, watching him threaten her so casually, Mara suddenly realized something. He had spent years teaching her exactly how cruel he could be. And without realizing it, he had also taught her how to survive him. Mara looked at Celine. She was watching her carefully now. She wanted Mara frightened. She wanted her desperate. She wanted her to beg. Instead, Mara smiled. It was a tiny smile. Barely there. Adrian didn't notice. Neither did Celine. "All right," Mara said. Adrian's shoulders relaxed. He thought he'd won. Celine smiled beneath her tears. She thought she had finally beaten Mara. Neither of them understood what Mara's agreement meant, because 3 days wasn't enough time for Mara to decide whether she would give Celine her kidney. 3 days was exactly how long she needed to prepare for what she was going to take from them. And for the first time in years, Mara wasn't afraid of what Adrian Vale might do to her. She was wondering how he would look when he realized what he'd done to himself. Mara did not sleep that night. Not because she was afraid of losing a kidney, because she had already begun to suspect that there was something much worse beneath Celine's story. 3 days. That was the deadline Adrian had given her. 3 days to surrender a part of her body to the woman who had spent years destroying her marriage. 3 days before Adrian expected Mara to lie on an operating table and allow strangers to cut into her. But Adrian had made one mistake. He had given Mara time, and time was dangerous when a woman had finally stopped being afraid. By 6 the next morning, Mara was sitting alone in her study with a cup of untouched coffee beside her. A thick folder lay open on the desk, Celine's medical records. Mara had spent most of the night obtaining them. Not through Adrian. Never through Adrian. She had learned a long time ago that asking her husband for help was usually another way of handing him a weapon. Instead, she'd used a private investigator she'd trusted for years, someone who owed her father a favor. The report had arrived just before dawn. Mara read it again. Then again. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Celine's records claimed she had severe renal failure, but the treatment history didn't match. There were no previous emergency admissions consistent with the condition, no long-term dialysis, no progression of the kind the doctors had described to Adrian. Even the medication history was strange. Mara's eyes narrowed as she read the same section for the 4th time. If Celine's kidneys were truly failing at the rate Adrian had been told, she should have been receiving a very different course of treatment. Instead, there were gaps. Too many gaps. And then there was the transplant recommendation. It had come far too quickly. Mara closed the file. She had suspected Celine was lying. Now she knew something was wrong. But suspicion wasn't enough. Not against Adrian. Not against Celine. Not when Celine had already spent years turning every accusation into a weapon against Mara. Mara reached for her phone. There was one person she could ask. She made the call. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, Mara sat perfectly still. She didn't speak. She simply waited. 40 minutes later, her phone rang. Mara answered. The voice on the other end was old and familiar. "You're right." Mara's fingers tightened around the phone. "You're certain?" "Completely." She waited. Based on the records you gave me, Celine's condition doesn't require a transplant. Mara's eyes closed. The words confirmed what she had already suspected. Then why are they doing it? There was a pause. I don't know, but whoever is overseeing her case is either incompetent or lying. Mara opened her eyes. She's lying. Silence. Then the voice asked, "What are you going to do?" Mara looked toward the window. Morning sunlight spilled across the city. Somewhere in that city, Adrian was probably waking up beside Celine. Probably thinking about how easily he'd forced his wife into submission. Probably believing that in 3 days, Mara would give him exactly what he wanted. Mara's mouth curved into the faintest smile. I haven't decided yet. She ended the call. But she had. She just wasn't ready to admit it aloud. By noon, Mara was standing outside Celine's hospital room. She had not told Adrian what she'd discovered. She hadn't told anyone. She simply walked inside. Celine was alone. The moment she saw Mara, her expression changed. Fear appeared first, then surprise, then the familiar trembling softness. Mara! Mara closed the door behind her. Don't! Celine blinked. Don't what? Don't perform. For several seconds, Celine simply stared at her. Then something remarkable happened. The trembling stopped. Her shoulders relaxed. The frightened expression disappeared. And Celine smiled. It wasn't the sweet smile she gave Adrian. It was colder. Sharper. Almost cruel. You finally figured it out? Mara's eyes narrowed. So you admit it. Celine laughed softly. Admit what? That you don't need a kidney. Celine leaned back against her pillows. I never said I needed yours. You allowed Adrian to believe you were dying. I allowed Adrian to believe whatever he wanted. Mara stared at her. Celine smiled wider. That's the difference between us. What difference? You still think truth matters. Mara said nothing. Celine looked toward the door, making sure Adrian wasn't there. Then she lowered her voice. You want to know why I did it? Mara remained silent. Because I am tired of hiding. Celine's eyes hardened. I want Adrian to choose me. He already has. No. Celine shook her head. Not publicly. She leaned forward. I want his family to know. I want his business partners to know. I want every woman who ever looked at him to know that I am the woman he chose. Mara's face remained expressionless. And you think taking my kidney will accomplish that? Celine smiled. No. She paused. Your suffering will. Mara felt something cold move through her chest. Celine continued. You have no idea how humiliating it is to love a man who has a wife. I wouldn't know. Celine laughed. You still don't understand. She reached for the glass beside her bed. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. I don't just want your husband. She looked directly into Mara's eyes. I want your place. Mara said nothing. I want to walk into the Vale family home as Adrian's wife. Celine's smile became almost triumphant. And when everyone knows that Adrian's wife gave up a kidney for me, do you know what they'll think? Mara didn't answer. They'll think you're pathetic. Celine laughed. They'll think you finally sacrificed something for the woman your husband actually loves. Mara stared at her, and suddenly, the entire picture became clear. Celine didn't care about the kidney. She never had. She wanted the story. She wanted the humiliation. She wanted Mara's pain to become proof that Celine had won. She wanted Adrian to stand beside her, while the world watched his wife sacrifice herself for his mistress. And after that, she believed Adrian would leave Mara. Celine seemed to read the realization in Mara's eyes. After the surgery, she whispered, Adrian will finally leave you. Mara's expression didn't change. He told you that? Celine smiled. He doesn't have to. She touched her own chest. I know him. Mara almost laughed. Because Celine was wrong. She knew Adrian's weaknesses. She knew how to manipulate his pride. She knew how to make him angry. But she didn't know him. Not the way Mara did. Mara had spent years studying the man she loved. She knew exactly what Adrian did when he was lying. She knew how he behaved when he felt guilty. She knew what made him defensive. And she knew one thing Celine didn't. Adrian was arrogant. Dangerously arrogant. He believed he was always the smartest person in the room, which meant he would never imagine that the woman he'd spent years treating like a helpless wife was capable of planning around him. Mara turned toward the door. Celine called after her. You're not going to tell him, are you? Mara stopped. Slowly, she looked over her shoulder. Celine was smiling. Go ahead, Celine said. Tell him. Mara stared at her. Celine's smile widened. He won't believe you. Mara's fingers tightened around the doorknob. She knew Celine was right. If Mara went to Adrian with the medical records, he would accuse her of jealousy. If she told him Celine was lying, Celine would cry. If she showed him proof, Celine would find another explanation, and Adrian would choose her again. So Mara didn't say anything. She simply walked out. The moment the hospital door closed behind her, the faint smile disappeared from her face. She walked down the corridor, past nurses, past doctors, past the private elevators. She didn't look back. When she reached the parking garage, she pulled out her phone. She stood beside her car for several seconds. Then she made a call. The person on the other end answered almost immediately. Mara said nothing at first. She looked up at the hospital windows. Somewhere above her, Celine was probably smiling. Somewhere else, Adrian was probably preparing to watch his wife surrender. They thought they had trapped her. They thought she had no choice. They were wrong. Mara lowered her voice. It's time to wake them up. Then she ended the call. For most of her life, Mara had believed her father was simply a powerful businessman. To the world, Victor Laurent had been exactly that. A billionaire with interests in shipping, construction, private security, and international finance. A man whose name could open doors in countries he'd never visited. A man politicians invited to private dinners, and businessmen called before making decisions that could affect entire industries. But that was only the part of him the world was allowed to see. There had always been another Victor Laurent. The man who knew things he shouldn't have known. The man who could locate a missing person within hours. The man who somehow knew when one of his competitors was planning to betray him before the betrayal happened. The man whose employees never appeared on company payrolls. They had called themselves his security division. Mara's father had called them his shadows. After his death, most people assumed those shadows disappeared with him. They hadn't. They simply waited. And Mara had spent years pretending she didn't know they were there. She had never wanted to live like her father. She wanted an ordinary life. Or as ordinary as life could be when married to Adrian Vale. She had wanted to be a wife. A quiet woman behind a powerful man. She had convinced herself that if she stayed patient, Adrian would eventually see her, eventually appreciate her, eventually love her. That illusion had died a long time ago. Now she sat alone in the back of a dark vehicle parked beneath an abandoned office building. Across from her sat a man in his late 50s. His hair was mostly gray, but his posture remained rigid. He had the stillness of someone who had spent decades watching doors instead of walking through them. His name was Elias. He had worked for Victor Laurent for 22 years. Mara remembered him from childhood. He had been the man who stood several feet behind her father at business meetings. The man who never smiled. The man Mara had once called Uncle Eli. He hadn't corrected her. Now he looked at her across the dim interior of the vehicle. You finally called. Mara looked down at the envelope in her lap. I should have called years ago. You weren't ready. No. She slowly opened the envelope. I wasn't. Inside was a photograph. Mara pulled it out. She stared at the woman in the picture. 28 years old. Beautiful. Wealthy. And completely unaware that Mara was holding her photograph. Elias glanced at it. He didn't ask who she was. He already knew. Mara slid the photograph across the seat. Bring her to me. Elias looked at the picture, then at Mara. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what she intended to do. He simply picked up the photograph. Alive? Mara's eyes hardened. Of course. And unharmed. She is not the enemy. Elias nodded once. Understood. He slipped the photograph into his coat. Mara looked out through the dark window. There was a time when she would have been horrified by what she was doing. Now she only felt tired. How long? Elias checked his watch. Not long. Mara nodded. Then go. He opened the door. Before stepping out, he paused. You know your father would have hated seeing you like this. Mara looked at him. Like what? Like someone who finally understands why he prepared all of this. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Elias stepped out and disappeared into the darkness. Mara remained in the vehicle. Her eyes closed. She could still remember her father telling her, years ago, that there were some things money could not protect a person from, At the time, she'd thought he was talking about death. She understood now. Sometimes the greatest danger was believing someone loved you. Across the city, Adrian was preparing for Celine's surgery. He had no idea Mara had already begun moving pieces around him. He sat in his office while his assistant reviewed the hospital arrangements. "Everything is prepared," the assistant said. "The surgical team is ready. The donor has been cleared." Adrian nodded. "Good." He glanced at his phone. No messages from Mara. No calls. No complaints. For the first time in years, his wife was behaving exactly the way he wanted. Quiet, obedient, accepting. He leaned back in his chair. "Has she spoken to anyone?" "Not that we know of." Adrian nodded again. He imagined Mara alone somewhere, trying to prepare herself for the surgery. Perhaps she was crying. Perhaps she was terrified. A small part of him felt guilty. He pushed the thought away. Celine was dying. Mara was healthy. This was the logical choice. At least, that was what he told himself. His phone rang. "Celine." He answered immediately. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was soft. "Scared." Adrian's expression softened. "Don't be. But Mara, don't worry about her." There was a pause. "You're sure she'll do it?" Adrian looked toward the window. She agreed. Celine exhaled. "Then everything will finally be over." Adrian knew exactly what she meant. After the surgery, he would finally be free to make their relationship public. He didn't notice the irony. He didn't notice that the woman he'd been preparing to sacrifice had already begun preparing to sacrifice something else, his own certainty. Mara spent the next several hours making phone calls. None of them were to Adrian. The first was to a surgeon. His reputation wasn't exactly clean, but he was experienced. More importantly, he was discreet. Mara gave him an address, a name, and a number. Then she told him exactly how much he would be paid. The surgeon hesitated. Mara increased the offer. He agreed. The second call was to someone inside the hospital. The third was to another person. By evening, Mara had identified 2 nurses who were willing to cooperate. Money had a way of making people flexible. Mara didn't enjoy what she was doing. She simply understood that the world Adrian lived in had taught her one important lesson. Rules only mattered when powerful people wanted them to. She placed her phone on the table, then stared at the hospital across the street. 3 days, that was all Adrian had given her. He thought those 3 days were for her to surrender. He didn't know they were for her to prepare. Mara picked up a glass of water. Her hand was perfectly steady. For the first time since she had married Adrian, she wasn't waiting for him to decide what happened next. She was deciding it herself. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Mara looked down. One message. No name. No explanation. Just 4 words. "We have her." Mara closed her eyes. A slow breath escaped her. Then she whispered the only word that mattered. "Good." At 7 the next morning, Adrian drove Mara to the hospital. He didn't hold her hand. He didn't ask whether she was frightened. He didn't even look at her during most of the drive. Mara sat beside him in silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outside the window, the city moved past in a blur of morning traffic. People were going to work. Parents were dropping children at school. Couples were arguing about breakfast. Ordinary lives. Mara wondered what it would feel like to have one again. Adrian glanced at her. "You haven't said a word." Mara turned her head. "What would you like me to say?" "Nothing." His eyes returned to the road. "Then don't." Mara almost smiled. Of course. He didn't want conversation. He wanted obedience. He wanted a wife who would walk into a hospital, surrender a kidney for his mistress, and never make him uncomfortable by asking questions. So Mara gave him exactly what he wanted. Silence. When they arrived, several members of Adrian's security team were already waiting. A hospital administrator hurried toward them. "Mr. Vale." Adrian nodded. "Everything is prepared?" "Yes, sir. The surgical team has been briefed." Adrian's gaze shifted toward Mara. "My wife must receive the best treatment possible." The administrator immediately nodded. "Of course. I don't care what it costs. We understand. Then make sure there are no mistakes." Mara watched him. His words sounded almost caring. If someone didn't know him, they might have believed he was worried about his wife. But Mara knew better. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about the operation going wrong. Because if Mara couldn't donate the kidney, Celine might have to wait, and Adrian couldn't tolerate the thought of waiting. The administrator turned to Mara. Mrs. Vale, we'll take you upstairs now. Mara nodded. Adrian checked his watch. How long? Preparation should take approximately an hour. The procedure itself will take several hours. Adrian nodded. Then he looked at Mara. Be cooperative. That was all. Not I'll be here when you wake up. Not I'm sorry. Not even good luck. Just be cooperative. Mara lowered her eyes. Of course. Adrian turned away. He was already pulling out his phone. Celine was waiting. Mara watched him walk down the corridor. He didn't look back once. A nurse approached her. Mrs. Vale? Mara looked up. Yes. This way, please. She followed. The corridor seemed strangely long. Every step took Mara closer to the operating room. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. Doctors moved past her. Nurses pushed carts through swinging doors. Machines beeped behind closed rooms. Mara kept walking. Her face remained calm, but inside, she counted every step. 1, 2, 3. She reached the preoperative room. The nurse helped her onto the bed. Are you comfortable? Mara looked at her. No. The nurse smiled sympathetically. That's understandable. Mara looked toward the door. Is everything ready? The nurse hesitated for only a fraction of a second. Then she smiled. Everything is ready. Mara nodded. Good. The nurse adjusted the blanket around her. You'll be asleep soon. Mara looked at the ceiling. She could hear footsteps outside. A trolley rolling past. Someone speaking quietly. Everything was happening exactly as it should, exactly as planned. But the audience didn't know that. To anyone watching, Mara looked terrified. Her fingers trembled slightly. Her breathing was shallow. She looked like a woman who had finally realized what was about to happen to her. The nurse touched her shoulder. Try to relax. Mara swallowed. I'm trying. The nurse smiled. Everything will be fine. Mara closed her eyes. She almost laughed. Everything would be fine, just not for the people who thought they had won. Across the hospital, Adrian sat beside Celine. She was dressed in a pale hospital gown, her head resting against the pillows. She looked fragile, perfectly fragile. Adrian held her hand. How are you feeling? Celine looked at him. Better now that you're here. Adrian smiled. I'm not going anywhere. She squeezed his fingers. What about Mara? Adrian's expression hardened. She's in surgery. Celine lowered her eyes. I still feel guilty. You shouldn't, but she's your wife. Adrian looked at her. For now. Celine slowly raised her eyes. He saw the surprise in them, then the hope. Adrian leaned closer. After this, everything changes. Celine's lips parted. Really? Really? She smiled. A genuine smile this time. What does that mean? Adrian looked at her. It means I won't let anything stand between us anymore. Celine's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears. She leaned against him. Adrian wrapped an arm around her. Neither of them noticed the irony. They were celebrating the future while Mara was being wheeled toward an operating room. Adrian believed the surgery would end his marriage. Celine believed it would make her Adrian's wife. And Mara had something entirely different in mind. On the other side of the hospital, an elevator opened. 2 nurses pushed a bed into the corridor. A woman lay unconscious beneath a white sheet. Her face was partially covered. A nurse looked at the chart. Mara Vale? The orderly nodded. That's what they said. VIP? Very. The nurse glanced toward the private operating area. Then let's move. Nobody questioned the woman's identity. Nobody stopped to compare her face with the photographs on the patient's file. Nobody asked why Mara Vale had arrived without the husband who had personally arranged her surgery. Nobody knew. Because Adrian's wife was almost never photographed. She avoided public events. She stayed away from the cameras. She had spent years living quietly beneath her husband's shadow. The hospital staff knew the name. They knew the money. They knew the instructions. That was enough. The bed rolled through the doors. Inside the operating room, the surgeon checked the chart. Mara Vale. One of the nurses nodded. Yes, doctor. The surgeon looked at the unconscious woman. Her vital signs were stable. He checked the monitors. Everything was ready. He looked at the 2 nurses. They remained silent. The surgeon pulled on his gloves. Outside the operating room, the world continued moving. Adrian was sitting beside Celine. Mara was supposedly waiting for surgery, and the captured woman was lying unconscious beneath the surgical lights. No one knew that the woman on the operating table was not the woman Adrian believed he had brought to the hospital. No one except the people Mara had chosen. The surgeon picked up the instrument. His eyes settled on the patient. For one final moment, there was silence. Then he looked at the nurses. Begin. The woman beneath the surgical lights was not Mara Vale. She was Adrian Vale's younger sister, Evelyn. She lay completely unconscious, unaware that the most important part of her life had just been taken from her. The surgeon stared at the chart one last time. Mara Vale. That was the name written across it. That was the name everyone in the operating room believed belonged to the woman on the table. The nurse checked the monitors. Vitals are stable. The surgeon nodded. Proceed. The operation began. Mara was nowhere near the operating room. She was sitting in a quiet apartment several kilometers away, watching the city through a window. Her phone rested on the table. She hadn't touched it in nearly an hour. There was nothing she could do now. Everything had already been set in motion, and if she had done everything correctly, nobody would realize the truth until it was too late. She closed her eyes. For years, Mara had believed that power meant having enough money to make people obey you. Her father had taught her otherwise. Real power was knowing what people would do before they did it. Adrian thought he had forced his wife into surgery. Celine thought she had finally defeated her rival. The hospital believed it was operating on Mara, but none of them knew the truth. Mara hadn't surrendered her kidney. She had surrendered something else. Their certainty. Inside the operating room, Evelyn's body reacted to the procedure. The monitors began beeping faster. Blood pressure is dropping. The surgeon frowned. Increase the fluids. The nurse moved quickly. Doctor, do it. The procedure continued. Under normal circumstances, Evelyn would have received additional precautions, additional monitoring, additional care. But Adrian had made one thing very clear. His wife was to undergo the operation. Nothing else mattered. And because the staff believed the woman on the table was Mara, they followed his instructions without question. The kidney was removed. The surgeon lifted it carefully. For a moment, everyone in the room was silent. Then the organ was placed into a sterile container. Transplant team is waiting, one nurse said. The surgeon nodded. Send it. But before the kidney could leave the room, Evelyn's heart rate suddenly spiked. She's crashing. The surgeon turned. What? Blood pressure is falling. Get the anesthesiologist. The room erupted into movement. Evelyn remained unconscious. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea that the kidney inside the container belonged to her. She had no idea that her own brother had unknowingly authorized the procedure. And she certainly had no idea that the woman whose place she had been forced to take had never intended to be there at all. At the same time, Celine was waiting. She sat upright in her hospital bed, staring at the door. Adrian was beside her. He had been there for most of the morning. She looked at the clock. Shouldn't it be done by now? Adrian glanced at his phone. They said it would take several hours. Celine nodded. She tried to appear anxious. But underneath the performance, excitement burned in her eyes. Soon, very soon, Mara would wake up without one of her kidneys, and Celine would finally have everything she wanted. Adrian's attention, Adrian's sympathy, Adrian's guilt, and eventually, Adrian's name. The door opened. The surgeon stepped inside. Celine immediately sat straighter. Adrian stood. How did it go? The surgeon hesitated. The kidney has been successfully removed. Adrian exhaled. Celine closed her eyes. Relief. At least, that's what she wanted Adrian to see. Thank God, she whispered. Adrian touched her shoulder. It's over. But the surgeon still hadn't left. Celine noticed. What is it? The kidney. Her eyes opened. What about it? We need to transfer it immediately. Celine stared at him. Then she said quietly, I want to see it. The surgeon hesitated. That's not. I want to see it. Adrian looked at her. Celine, she smiled weakly. I just want to see what she gave me. Adrian didn't object, so the surgeon left. Several minutes later, he returned carrying a sterile container. Inside was the kidney. Celine stared at it. For a long moment, she said nothing. Adrian looked at her. Are you all right? Celine's lips slowly curved upward. She reached toward the container, not touching it, just looking. Then she laughed softly. Adrian frowned. What? Celine looked at him. Nothing. A call came in and Adrian stepped out to take it. The surgeon waited. Where should we send it? Celine turned toward him. Nowhere. The surgeon blinked. What? Celine's smile disappeared. Get rid of it. Silence filled the room. The surgeon stared at her. Mrs. Celine. This organ is intended for transplantation. I know. Then, I don't need it. The surgeon's face changed. What did you just say? Celine looked at him. For the first time, she didn't bother pretending. I don't need the kidney. What do you mean? Celine sighed. I mean exactly what I said. The surgeon took a step back. But your medical records were arranged. Celine looked almost amused by his confusion. I was never going to use it. Then why? Her gaze shifted toward the container. Because I wanted her to lose something. Celine's smile returned. I wanted Mara to wake up and know that she had given away a piece of herself for me. The surgeon looked horrified. Celine didn't care. I wanted her to understand that Adrian chose me. I wanted to win. The words hung in the air. And suddenly, the entire operation took on a different meaning. It had never been about saving Celine. It had never been about medicine. It had never been about a dying woman. It had been revenge, humiliation, possession. Celine looked at the surgeon. Get rid of it. He stared at her. You're certain? Completely. The surgeon swallowed, then nodded. He took the container and left. The door closed behind him. Celine leaned back against the pillows. She looked satisfied. Several kilometers away, Mara received a message. The procedure is complete. She read it once, then again. Her eyes closed. Her father had always told her that revenge was not about making someone suffer. It was about making them understand. Mara had never understood what he meant. Not until now. She opened her eyes. The city stretched endlessly beyond the window. Somewhere inside that city, Adrian believed his wife had just sacrificed her kidney. Somewhere else, Celine was celebrating a victory that didn't exist. And in a hospital bed, Adrian's sister was fighting for her life because of a decision her brother had made. Mara stood. She walked toward the window. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself to smile. Not because she was happy, because everything had gone exactly as planned. She whispered to herself, now we wait. For 5 days, Adrian Vale never once asked to see his wife. Not once. He knew Mara was somewhere in the hospital. He knew she'd undergone surgery. He knew she'd lost a kidney. And somehow, that was enough for him. His attention remained fixed on Celine. On the woman he believed had finally been saved. On the woman he believed he could finally build a life with. Every morning, a nurse gave him the same update. Mrs. Vale is stable. And every morning, Adrian nodded. Good. That was all. He never asked how much pain she was in. He never asked whether she was awake. He never asked whether she needed him. He never even asked to see her. Why would he? He had already decided that the worst was over. Mara had done what he wanted. She had given Celine her kidney, and Adrian believed that meant he owed Mara nothing more. On the second day, his mother called. Adrian glanced at his phone. Mother. He ignored it. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. Celine looked at the screen. Your mother? Yes. Don't answer. Adrian frowned. Why? Celine gave a tired sigh. Because she will start asking about Mara. Adrian looked at her. So? Adrian, you know how your mother is. Celine reached for his hand. She'll make you feel guilty. Adrian's jaw tightened. She always does. Exactly. Celine squeezed his fingers. You've been here with me for 2 days. You haven't slept properly. You need rest. Adrian looked at his phone again. It stopped ringing. A moment later, a message appeared. Call me immediately. Adrian locked the screen. I'll call her later. Celine smiled. That's better. She leaned against his shoulder, and Adrian let her. He didn't notice the faint satisfaction in her eyes. He didn't know that on another floor of the same hospital, his sister was fighting for her life. By the 3rd day, Evelyn's condition had worsened. The complications had become more severe. Her body was struggling to adjust after the operation. The doctors were concerned. Her mother had barely left the hospital. Her father had spent hours speaking with specialists. But nobody could understand why Adrian wasn't there. He had been told his wife had undergone surgery. He had been told she was recovering. He had not been told that the woman in that bed was Evelyn, because everyone believed she was Mara, and Adrian had never bothered to look. On the 4th day, his father called. Adrian saw the name. Father. He stared at it, then turned the phone face down. Celine noticed. Don't. Adrian looked at her. I should probably answer. Why? My father doesn't usually call this much. Celine's expression changed. Only for a second. Then she smiled. Maybe he's upset that you're spending time with me. Adrian sighed. Probably. He'll get over it. Adrian nodded. The phone stopped ringing. Celine leaned closer. You promised me you'd stay. Adrian looked at her. I know. She smiled. Then stay. He did. On the 5th day, Adrian finally received another update. A nurse entered Celine's room. Mr. Vale? Adrian looked up. Yes? Your wife is stable. He nodded. Good. The nurse left. Celine smiled. You see? Adrian looked at her. She's fine. Of course she is. Celine reached for his hand. You don't need to worry. He nodded. And that was it. 5 days. 5 days during which Mara was supposedly recovering. 5 days during which Adrian never once went to see her. 5 days during which he sat beside the woman who had orchestrated the entire nightmare. 5 days during which his own sister's condition deteriorated. 5 days during which his parents begged hospital staff for answers. 5 days during which Adrian chose not to listen. Then, on the evening of the 5th day, his phone rang. Again. Mother. He ignored it. It rang again. He ignored it. Then again. Celine looked irritated. Why is she being so persistent? Adrian frowned. I don't know. The phone stopped. Then his father's number appeared. Adrian stared at the screen. Something in his chest tightened. He answered. Hello? There was no greeting. His father's voice came through, hard and furious. What have you done? Adrian sat upright. What? What have you done to your sister? Adrian frowned. My sister? His father's breathing was heavy. Where are you? At the hospital. Which hospital? Adrian gave him the name. There was silence. Then his father said something that made Adrian laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. Your sister is in this hospital. Adrian leaned back. That's not possible. She has been here for 5 days. No. Adrian. No. His father sounded furious. She underwent surgery 5 days ago. Adrian's smile disappeared. What surgery? Silence. Then his father answered. A kidney removal. The room seemed to tilt. Adrian stared at Celine. She was watching him. Confusion flickered across her face. My sister didn't have surgery. His father's voice cracked with anger. Then why is she lying in a hospital bed without a kidney? Adrian stood. His chair scraped violently across the floor. He looked toward the door. Where is she? Ask the hospital. Father, go see her. Adrian's heart began pounding. What are you talking about? His father's voice dropped. Your sister was brought here 5 days ago. Adrian shook his head. No. She was unconscious when they brought her in. No. They thought she was your wife. Adrian froze. The words echoed inside his head. They thought she was your wife. His mouth went dry. That's impossible. His father said nothing. Adrian looked toward Celine, then toward the door. His voice came out barely above a whisper. That's impossible. My wife was the donor. His father's answer was cold, final. Then go look at your wife. Adrian ran. He had never run through a hospital in his life. People moved out of his way as he tore down the corridor, his shoes striking the polished floor hard enough to echo. His father's words kept repeating in his head. Your sister was brought here 5 days ago. She was unconscious. They thought she was your wife. Go look at your wife. Adrian's chest tightened. No. It couldn't be true. It had to be some kind of mistake. A misunderstanding. Something that could be explained. His sister was supposed to be across the city. She was supposed to be fine. She couldn't possibly be lying in this hospital. Without a kidney. He reached the ward his father had given him. 2 doctors stood outside a private room. Adrian stopped in front of them. Where is she? One of the doctors looked at him. Mr. Vale? My sister. Evelyn Vale. Where is she? The doctor exchanged a glance with the other. Then opened the door. Adrian stepped inside. His world stopped. Evelyn lay unconscious beneath the white sheets. There were tubes everywhere. A monitor beside her bed beeped steadily. Her face was pale. Far too pale. Her lips were dry. One of her arms was connected to an IV. Adrian stared at her. His little sister. The girl who used to follow him around the house. The woman who had called him whenever she needed advice. The person he'd spent his entire life protecting. She was lying in a hospital bed, broken. Adrian took a step forward. What happened? The doctor followed him inside. She developed complications following the nephrectomy. Adrian turned sharply. The what? Her kidney was removed 5 days ago. Adrian's eyes dropped toward the bed. He couldn't breathe. Why? The doctor looked confused. Mr. Vale, your instructions were very clear. My instructions? You authorized the surgery. Adrian stared at him. No? The doctor frowned. You personally arranged the procedure. I arranged a kidney donation for my wife. Yes, the doctor pointed toward Evelyn. That's who we believed this was. Adrian's face went cold. You thought my sister was my wife? The doctor swallowed. She was brought in under your wife's name. Did nobody check? We were told she was Mara Vale. Did nobody look at her identification? The doctor hesitated. There was no reason to believe the information was incorrect. Adrian's voice rose. She's my sister. We understand that now. Now? The word came out like a growl. You understand it now? The doctor tried to remain calm. Mr. Vale, your wife was listed as the donor. Your office contacted the hospital. Your instructions were that the procedure was to proceed without delay. Adrian stared at him. His own words, his own authority, his own arrogance. He had told them to proceed. He had told them his wife must receive the best treatment possible. He had told them there was no room for mistakes. And now his sister was lying in a hospital bed without a kidney. Because everyone had believed him. Because he had never bothered to check. Because he had never bothered to see Mara. Adrian's stomach turned. What complications? The doctor's expression became serious. Internal bleeding during the post-operative period. Her blood pressure dropped significantly. We've managed to stabilize her, but she's still very weak. Will she recover? We don't know yet. Adrian's heart seemed to stop. What do you mean you don't know? We're doing everything we can. Do more. The doctor looked at him. We are. Adrian moved toward the bed. Evelyn. She didn't respond. He reached for her hand. It was cold. Evelyn. Her eyelids fluttered. Adrian froze. Evie? Her eyes opened slightly. For a moment, she looked confused. Then she saw him. Her brows pulled together. Adrian? I'm here. Her lips moved. Why? He leaned closer. Why what? Her breathing was weak. Why did you let them? She stopped to catch her breath. Adrian's heart broke. Let them do what? Her eyes filled with tears. Do this to me? Adrian couldn't answer. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Evelyn stared at him. You? Her voice was barely audible. You brought me here. Adrian shook his head. No, but even he didn't believe himself. Evelyn's eyes closed. Why did you let them? Her voice disappeared. The monitor began beeping faster. Doctors rushed forward. Give her space. Adrian stepped back. He watched them surround his sister. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Vale had absolutely no control over what happened next. He left the room. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone. Find Mara. His head of security answered immediately. Sir? Find my wife. She's at the hospital. No. Adrian looked back at the room where Evelyn lay. She's not here. There was silence. Sir? Find her. Yes, sir. Adrian ended the call. Then he turned toward the corridor. He knew where Mara was supposed to be. The room where she'd supposedly been recovering. He hurried there. The door opened. Empty. Adrian stopped. There was no bed, no flowers, no medical equipment, no overnight bag, nothing. He stepped inside. His heart pounded. Where is she? A nurse nearby looked confused. Who? My wife. Mara Vale. The nurse frowned. I don't know. Adrian turned. What do you mean you don't know? Sir, I don't have a patient by that name. She had surgery 5 days ago. The nurse shook her head. No, sir. Adrian's breathing became uneven. Check again. She looked at the computer. There was no record, no admission, no post-operative notes, nothing. Adrian stepped closer. She was brought here. The nurse looked frightened now. Sir, I can check with the surgical department. Do it. She hurried away. Adrian stood in the empty room. His eyes moved over every surface. Nothing. Not one trace of Mara. He pulled out his phone. Check the hospital records. His security chief answered. We're already doing that. Find her. We will. Now. Adrian ended the call. His mind was racing. Mara had agreed to the surgery. She had come to the hospital. He had seen her. Hadn't he? He remembered the black dress, the quiet expression, the way she'd walked beside him, the way she'd looked at him. Had that really been Mara? Adrian's stomach dropped. He suddenly remembered something. She had smiled, just before saying yes, not nervously, not sadly. She had smiled, a tiny smile. He hadn't understood it then. Now he did. Mara had known. She had known something was wrong, and she'd let him walk straight into it. Adrian pulled out his phone again. Lock down the hospital. Sir? Nobody leaves. He started walking, then stopped, because from somewhere down the corridor came a sound. A woman's laughter. Soft, bright, familiar. Adrian slowly turned toward the room he'd just left. Celine. She was laughing. And suddenly, the sound didn't feel innocent anymore. It felt like a knife. Adrian stared at her door. His jaw tightened. Then he walked toward it. Adrian stopped outside Celine's door. Her laughter came through the gap. It was light, carefree. Nothing like the frightened, fragile woman she'd pretended to be for the past 5 days. Adrian's hand slowly curled into a fist. He didn't open the door, not yet. He listened. Mom, you should have seen her. Celine laughed again. I finally got that stupid woman to donate her kidney. Adrian froze. His breathing stopped. Inside the room, Celine continued. She was terrified. You should have seen her face when they took her away. Adrian's blood ran cold. He pressed himself closer to the door. I almost felt sorry for her. Celine giggled. Almost. A pause. Then, she deserved it. Adrian closed his eyes. His sister's face appeared in his mind. Pale, unconscious, connected to machines. Why did you let them do this to me? Celine continued. The doctors did exactly what I wanted. I made sure they didn't treat her like some precious billionaire wife. Adrian's jaw tightened. They didn't give her the kind of care she expected. Celine laughed. She needed to learn that she wasn't important. Adrian's stomach turned. Every word matched what the doctors had told him. The unnecessary risks, the lack of precaution, the way they had treated the woman on the operating table. His sister. Celine had wanted Mara to suffer. But Mara hadn't been there. Adrian's hand reached for the door. He pushed it open. Celine turned. The phone slipped from her hand. Her smile disappeared instantly. Adrian? He stood in the doorway. His face was expressionless. That frightened her more than anger would have. Who were you talking to? Celine swallowed. My mother. Adrian stepped inside. What were you talking about? Celine's eyes darted toward the phone. Nothing. Nothing? I was just talking about Mara? Celine went still. Adrian closed the door behind him. Tell me. I don't know what you heard. I heard everything. Celine's face paled. Adrian walked toward her. You said she was terrified. Celine said nothing. You said the doctors didn't treat her properly. Silence. You said she deserved it. Adrian. Was that a lie too? Celine's lips trembled. I was angry. Adrian stared at her. At Mara? Yes. Why? Because she has everything. Adrian's expression hardened. Everything? She has you. The words came out like a confession. You love her. Adrian laughed once. There was no humor in it. No. Celine stared at him. You don't love her? No. Then why? Why what? Adrian stepped closer. Why did you spend years lying to me? Celine's face changed. Adrian. I never. The stairs. She froze. What? The stairs. Adrian's voice was quiet. You said Mara pushed you. Celine looked away. You were angry. Did she push you? Celine said nothing. Answer me. No. The word was barely audible. Adrian's chest tightened. The dress. Celine swallowed. I was upset. Did Mara destroy your dress? No. The hair. Celine closed her eyes. Adrian. Did Mara pull your hair? No. Adrian stared at her. Every answer was another piece of the marriage he'd thought he understood collapsing around him. How many times? Celine began crying. I don't know. How many? I don't know. Her voice cracked. Adrian's face remained cold. The bruises? Celine shook her head. The bruises were fake. The photographs? I took them myself. The accusations? Celine looked down. Some of them. Some? Most. Adrian stepped back. He looked at her as though he'd never seen her before. Why? Celine wiped her tears. Because I love you. Adrian stared at her. That's your excuse? I loved you. You hurt my wife. Because she was taking you away from me. She was my wife. I know, Celine screamed. Then she broke down. I knew. She covered her face. I knew she was your wife. I knew you would always go back to her. Adrian's voice became dangerously quiet. So you destroyed her. I wanted you to choose me. You could have told me. You wouldn't have listened. Adrian stared at her. She laughed bitterly through her tears. You never listened to me either. What about my wife? Celine looked up. Adrian's voice cracked. What did she ever do to you? Celine's eyes hardened. She deserved it. Adrian went still. Why? Celine stared at him for several seconds. Then she smiled. Not the soft smile. Not the frightened smile. The real one. You want to know why? Adrian said nothing. Celine stood. Because you made me believe I could. Adrian frowned. She stepped closer. Every time I cried, you believed me. She pointed toward him. Every time I said Mara hurt me, you punished her. Another step. Every time she tried to defend herself, you called her jealous. Adrian's face tightened. You could have told me the truth. Celine laughed. The truth? She shook her head. You never wanted the truth. Adrian stared at her. Celine's voice became quieter. You wanted to feel powerful. He said nothing. You wanted to believe that your wife was beneath you. Another tear rolled down her cheek. And I gave you that. Adrian's jaw clenched. Celine looked directly into his eyes. You didn't love me enough to see the truth. She paused, then delivered the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You loved yourself enough to believe me. Silence. Adrian couldn't breathe, because somewhere inside him, he knew she was right. He had seen the inconsistencies. He had noticed the contradictions. He had watched Mara cry. He had watched Celine smile when Mara wasn't looking. He had simply chosen what was easier, what made him feel powerful. What allowed him to punish the woman who loved him without ever having to question himself? Adrian looked at Celine, then at the woman who had spent years manipulating him, and finally, he understood something far worse than the fact that Celine had lied. He had wanted to believe her. The truth did not destroy Celine all at once. It came apart piece by piece. First came the hospital records, then the security footage, then the photographs, then the witnesses. Every lie Celine had carefully built over the years began collapsing under the weight of evidence. Adrian sat in his office late into the night while his investigators placed file after file in front of him. This is the footage from the night of the staircase incident. Adrian stared at the screen. There was Celine, walking down the stairs perfectly normally. She looked around, made sure nobody was watching, then deliberately threw herself down the final 3 steps. Adrian's stomach twisted. Keep going. The investigator changed the file. The dress. Another recording. Celine entering Mara's room, looking around, taking a pair of scissors, cutting the dress herself. Then, leaving. The next file. The hair. Celine had cut her own hair before confronting Adrian and accusing Mara. Another. The bruises. Another. The supposed public confrontation. Another. A charity event, where Celine had deliberately spilled wine over Mara's dress before pretending Mara had attacked her. Another. A photograph sent to Adrian showing Celine with a bruised wrist. The metadata showed that the photograph had been taken hours before she ever encountered Mara. Adrian sat motionless. How many? The investigator hesitated. 23 confirmed incidents. Adrian looked up. 23? That's what we've verified so far. He looked back at the screen. 23. 23 times he'd believed her. 23 times he'd punished Mara. 23 times he'd chosen Celine without asking his wife what had happened. His stomach turned. Get me everything. We already have. Everything. The investigator nodded. Yes, sir. The door closed. Adrian remained alone. He looked around his office. The place where he'd made decisions worth billions. The place where he'd built his empire. The place where he'd convinced himself that he was too intelligent to be manipulated. And yet Celine had manipulated him for years. Not because she was smarter, because he had wanted to believe her. That realization hurt more than the lies. He found Celine's hair-cutting scissors in a drawer. He found the messages she'd exchanged with people who had helped stage the scandals. He found payments, photographs, instructions, names, dates, everything. And with every discovery, Adrian remembered Mara, her face, her silence, the way she'd stopped defending herself, the way she'd eventually stopped crying. He had mistaken that silence for guilt. It had never been guilt. It had been exhaustion. Adrian pressed his palms against his face. What did I do? Nobody answered, because there was nobody left to answer him. Mara was gone, and Adrian couldn't find her. Celine's punishment came quickly, not because Adrian had suddenly become righteous, not because he had forgotten his own cruelty, but because guilt had turned into rage. He confronted her with every piece of evidence. She tried denying it, then explaining it, then begging. None of it mattered. Adrian had spent years making Mara suffer whenever Celine claimed she'd been hurt. Now, he turned that same cruelty towards Celine. He pushed her down the staircase she'd once used to frame Mara. He cut her hair. He took her to an alley filled with beggars, and left her there after paying them $10,000, telling them to tear at her clothes and humiliate her. He wanted her to experience even a fraction of the helplessness Mara had endured. But revenge did not make him feel better. It made the emptiness worse, because every punishment only reminded him of one thing. Mara had suffered because of him, and now she was gone. Find her. Adrian stood in the middle of his office. His security chief looked exhausted. We're trying. Try harder. We've checked every property connected to her. Then check the properties that aren't connected to her. We've checked her bank accounts. Nothing? Nothing. Credit cards? No activity. Phones? All disconnected. Adrian's jaw tightened. Friends? Nobody knows where she is. Her family? The security chief hesitated. We've found very little. Adrian stared at him. Very little. Those words bothered him, because Mara had disappeared too cleanly. No money trail. No phone trail. No obvious transportation records. Nothing. It was almost as if she'd planned to vanish. Adrian suddenly remembered something. Mara's father, Victor Laurent, a powerful businessman. A man Adrian had never paid much attention to because he'd assumed Mara's father had left her nothing but money and a surname. But perhaps that wasn't all. Investigate her father's old network. The security chief looked surprised. What network? Adrian's eyes narrowed. Exactly. Miles away, Mara watched a report on her laptop. Adrian's sister was recovering. Slowly, but she was alive. The doctors expected her to regain most of her strength with time. Mara closed the report. Another file appeared. Celine. Her reputation had collapsed. The staged injuries, the manipulation, the lies, the public scandals. Everything was coming out. Adrian had lost control of the narrative, and the woman who had once been untouchable was now being avoided by everyone who had once wanted to stand beside her. Mara stared at the screen. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply closed the laptop. Her assistant stood nearby. Anything else? Mara looked out the window. Adrian? He hasn't stopped searching. Good. He believes you're still alive. Mara nodded. He should. The assistant hesitated. Are you ready? Mara looked down at the city below. Not yet. Then she turned away from the window. We're not finished. Months later, the boardroom was silent. Adrian Vale sat at the head of the table. Around him were some of the most powerful business leaders in the country. The meeting had been arranged weeks ago. A mysterious investor had purchased a significant stake in one of Adrian's most important companies. Nobody knew who the investor was, not even Adrian. He had been told only that the person wanted a private meeting. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Let's get this over with. The doors opened. A woman walked inside. Adrian barely glanced up. Then his eyes froze. The room disappeared. The conversations, the papers, the executives, everything. Because the woman walking toward him was someone he had spent months searching for. Someone he had believed he might never see again. Mara. Alive, calm, beautiful, and completely unafraid. She walked to the other side of the table. Then she sat down in the chair reserved for the person controlling the meeting. Adrian couldn't speak. Mara crossed one leg over the other. She looked directly at him and smiled. Good morning, husband. Adrian couldn't move. For several seconds, he simply stared at Mara. Alive, standing in front of him. Not weak, not broken, not the frightened woman he had watched walk into a hospital 5 months ago. She looked completely different. Or perhaps this was the woman she had always been. The woman he had never bothered to see. Mara, she tilted her head. Yes? His voice failed him. One of the executives looked between them. You two know each other? Mara smiled. Very well. Adrian stood abruptly. What are you doing here? Mara glanced at the chair beneath her. Apparently, I'm running this meeting. The screen behind her lit up. A series of company names appeared. Then percentages. Then ownership structures. Adrian stared. His face slowly lost its color. No. Mara said nothing. He stepped closer to the screen. That's impossible. Is it? Adrian looked at the figures again. The companies. The investment firms. The holding companies. The shares. Piece by piece, Mara had acquired portions of his empire. Quietly. Carefully. Without ever appearing as the buyer. Adrian turned toward her. How? Mara smiled faintly. My father. The room went silent. Adrian stared at her. Victor left you this? He left me more than money. She folded her hands. He left me a network. Adrian's stomach tightened. How long? Long enough. You planned this? Mara looked at him. The day you told me to give Celine my kidney, I understood something. What? You believed I had nothing. Adrian said nothing. You believed I had no power, except whatever you allowed me to have. Mara leaned back. So I decided to show you what helplessness actually feels like. She tapped the table. The screen changed. Celine's messages appeared. Photographs, payment records, security footage, every lie, every staged injury, every manipulation. Adrian looked at them. He had already seen some of it, but now he was seeing the full picture. Mara had collected everything. Then another file appeared. Adrian frowned. What is that? Mara looked at him. Your mother. His face changed. My mother? She wasn't simply aware of Celine. Mara clicked the file open. Messages appeared. Conversations, financial transfers, meetings. Adrian's breathing became heavier. His mother had known. She had helped. She had encouraged Celine. She had even advised her on how to separate Mara from Adrian. Adrian's hands curled into fists. No. Mara's voice remained calm. Ask her. That evening, Adrian confronted his mother. She was sitting in her living room when he walked inside. One look at his face told her everything. What happened? Adrian threw the file onto the table. Did you help Celine? His mother went still. What? Did you? She looked at the papers, then away. Adrian's voice cracked. Tell me the truth. His mother remained silent. That silence was enough. Adrian stepped back. You knew. I was protecting you. From Mara? From her family. Adrian stared at her. Why? His mother sighed. I never wanted her. She was my wife. I know. You helped Celine. Yes. The admission hit him harder than he expected. Why? His mother looked at him. Because I believed Mara's family could be controlled. Adrian's face hardened. What does that mean? I thought the Laurent fortune would eventually come under our influence. She lowered her eyes. But Mara wasn't as weak as we thought. Adrian stared at her. Suddenly, something about her words bothered him. The Laurent fortune. His voice became quieter. What exactly did you want from them? His mother didn't answer. Adrian stepped closer. What were you planning? She looked away. And for the first time, Adrian understood that there were pieces of his own family's history that he'd never been told. Mara had already discovered them. After returning to her father's estate, she'd spent weeks going through the files he'd left behind. Most were ordinary business records, contracts, investments, acquisitions, but some were different. Private notes, surveillance reports, names, dates, photographs. Her father had been watching the Vale family long before Mara ever met Adrian, and the more she read, the more disturbed she became. Victor had suspected that the Vale family wasn't simply interested in business. They were interested in his influence, his network, his fortune, his daughter. Mara turned another page, then another. Her father's handwriting appeared across the top of an old file. The Vales. Beneath it was a sentence. They are preparing for something. Mara's fingers tightened. She continued reading. There had been meetings she knew nothing about. Deals she'd never heard of. People connected to both families. And then, A photograph. Her father. Adrian's father. Standing together at a private event years before Mara's marriage. Mara stared at it. Why had her father been investigating them? She reached for another file, then stopped. A black folder sat at the bottom of the drawer. It was older than the others. Dust covered its edges. There was a handwritten label across the front. Mara's breath caught. If they ever take something from Mara. She stared at the words. For several seconds, she couldn't bring herself to open it. Her father had written that. For her. Before he died. Why? What had he known? Mara slowly lifted the folder. Her hands were trembling. She opened it. Inside were documents, bank transfers, photographs, phone records, a medical report, then a photograph of a car. Mara's heart stopped. She knew that car. It was her father's. The date on the document was the day he died. She read the report, then read it again. The official cause of death had been an accident, but the evidence in front of her suggested something else. The brakes had been tampered with. There were payments made to a mechanic several days before the accident. And one of the names connected to those payments? Mara knew it. She had seen it before. In her father's old notes. A man connected to the Vale family. Her fingers began to shake. She turned another page. There was more. A photograph. A meeting. Adrian's father. A financial transfer. The same date. The same week. Mara stared at the evidence. Her revenge had begun because Adrian tried to take her kidney. She had believed that was the moment her life changed. She had believed Celine was the enemy. She had believed Adrian's cruelty was the worst thing she would ever have to face. But now, Mara slowly lowered the file. For the first time since beginning her revenge, she was genuinely afraid. Because the kidney had never been the beginning of this war. It was only the moment the war finally came for her. The divorce papers arrived on a Monday morning. Adrian stared at them for a long time. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming, no tears. Just his name, printed beside Mara's. Irreconcilable differences. He almost laughed. After everything they had done to each other, those 3 words seemed painfully inadequate. Mara didn't attend the final hearing. She didn't need to. Her lawyers handled everything. By the time the divorce was finalized, Mara already controlled the company Adrian had spent years building. The shares she'd quietly acquired had given her enough voting power to take control. The board chose her. The investors backed her. And Adrian? He lost everything. The penthouse was sold. The cars were repossessed. His private accounts were frozen. The businesses he had once controlled were now being dismantled piece by piece. For the first time in his life, Adrian Vale understood what it meant to have nothing. No influence, no power. No wife waiting at home, no woman begging for his attention. Just silence. And memories. He often remembered Mara standing outside Celine's hospital room. He remembered the way she'd said all right when he gave her 3 days. He remembered the tiny smile he'd ignored. He finally understood. She hadn't surrendered. She had simply stopped fighting him openly. And by the time he realized it, she had already won.
Celine didn't disappear quietly.
After escaping the alley, bruised, humiliated, and desperate, she went straight to Adrian. She believed he would forgive her. After all, hadn't she always been able to make him forgive her? She stood outside his temporary apartment for nearly an hour before he finally opened the door. Adrian stared at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Celine began crying. "Adrian, please." He didn't move. "I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem." Her face crumpled. "I love you." Adrian's expression hardened. "You destroyed my wife. I made mistakes. You lied to me for years. I was afraid. You almost killed my sister." Celine shook her head. "I never meant for that to happen." "But it did." She reached for him. Adrian stepped back. "Don't touch me. Adrian, please." He pointed toward the street. "Leave." She stared at him. "You can't do this to me." Adrian gave her a cold smile. "You taught me how." Then he shut the door. Celine stood outside for several minutes. Then she walked away. She had nowhere to go. No money. No friends willing to help. No Adrian. And no one left to manipulate. She survived by stealing food wherever she could. One evening, she was caught taking bread from a small shop. The owner was already angry. The argument became violent. Celine fell. The owner kept beating her. By the time anyone called for help, it was too late. Celine died on the pavement outside the shop, alone. The woman who had once dreamed of becoming a billionaire's wife ended her life with nothing but the clothes on her back. Mara never heard the details until weeks later. She didn't ask for them. She didn't celebrate. She simply sat in her father's old garden one evening, watching the sunset. The empire she'd inherited was now hers. Not Adrian's, not Celine's. Hers. But for the first time, she didn't feel the need to prove anything. She had spent so long fighting that she had forgotten what peace felt like. Now she understood. Peace wasn't Adrian suffering. It wasn't Celine losing. It wasn't even taking control of the company. Peace was waking up without fear. It was making decisions without asking whether Adrian would approve. It was walking into a room without wondering who might accuse her of something. It was finally belonging to herself. Mara closed her eyes. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Her father was gone. Her marriage was over. Her enemies were gone. And somehow, after everything, she was still standing. Mara smiled. Not the careful smile she'd learned to wear around Adrian. A real one. For the first time in years, she didn't need revenge. She had something better. A life that belonged entirely to her. And so, my loves, you thought Mara's revenge was over, didn't you? Adrian lost his wife. He lost his mistress. He lost his fortune. But what if I told you the kidney was only the beginning? Because just when Mara thought she had finally uncovered the reason her father had warned her about the Vale family, she opened one final file. And what she found inside changed everything. If you were Mara, would you keep digging? Or walk away and finally live in peace? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one. Because the darkest secrets are often buried where nobody thinks to look.